When Danish naturalist Peter Lund pulled human bones from the caves of Lagoa Santa in southeast Brazil in 1843, he could not have guessed that the skulls he studied would ignite one of the longest-running debates in American archaeology. Their broad faces, low foreheads, and distinctive morphologies did not resemble the narrower, higher-vaulted skulls of recent indigenous Brazilians. Instead, they suggested something else, an earlier, stranger ancestry. More than a century later, modern imaging technology and genetic insights have confirmed that the Lagoa Santa crania were unlike the skulls of later Native Americans. Their striking differences hint at one of the most profound realizations of American prehistory. South America was not peopled by a single homogeneous migration, but by multiple streams of settlers, whose diversity is still etched in the bones of Brazil's first inhabitants. The Lagoa Santa Karst region is riddled with limestone caves and shelters that preserve a deep archaeological record. Since Lund's day, excavations have revealed thousands of bones and artifacts, including the famous Luzia skull, dated to around 11,000 years ago. Luzia and others like her represent what anthropologists call the Paleo-American morphology, cranial forms that are generalized, broad-faced, and strikingly distinct from later Native American crania. Luzia stood only about 1.5 meters tall, roughly 5 feet in height, and her bones reveal that she was gracile rather than robust, with a lightly built frame. Unlike later, more heavily built populations, Luzia's skeleton shows fine bone structure, emphasizing her delicate build. Her skull morphology, however, was striking. She had a low forehead, a broad face, and a projecting jaw, features that set her apart from later Native American skulls, with their narrower, higher-vaulted forms and more robust morphology. This combination of a gracile body with a distinctive Paleo-American cranial shape makes Luzia a key figure in the debate over multiple migrations into South America. These early skeletons were long thought to be simply the earliest examples of a single founding population that later diversified. But intensive excavation at sites like Lapa do Santo, coupled with craniometric analysis, has shown that the story is more complex. More recently, archaeologists exhumed 26 burials at Lapa do Santo, ranging in date from about 10,500 to 8,000 years ago. The funerary practices were extraordinary. Some burials were intact, but others were dismembered, bundled, and even combined with bones of multiple individuals. These shifts in mortuary tradition signaled that Lagoa Santa was home not to one homogeneous culture, but to a succession of peoples with distinct traditions. The researchers who led much of this research came to see Lagoa Santa as a stage on which several different populations had acted out their lives and deaths. The craniometric puzzle is stark. When measured using geometric morphometrics, Lagoa Santa skulls diverge significantly from later Native American crania. Mark Huber of the Ohio State University applied 3D imaging techniques to a suite of Lagoa Santa specimens and compared them to both global populations and later Native American groups. The results showed that Paleo-American skulls do not cluster with later South American populations. Instead, they share affinities with Upper Pleistocene Eurasians, with surprising connections to Australasian and Polynesian populations. This pattern cannot be explained by simple in situ diversification. If the first settlers into South America had been the ancestors of all later groups, we would expect continuity between Paleo-American skulls and later crania. Instead, the Lagoa Santa skulls appear as an outlier, morphologically distinct, retaining a generalized ancestral shape that later disappeared. This strongly suggests that South America was peopled by at least two different waves, an early Paleo-American migration with generalized morphology, and a later migration of populations bearing the more East Asian-derived morphology that dominates among recent indigenous peoples. For decades, scholars debated whether the striking differences in skull form reflected local evolutionary processes, drift, isolation or selection, or multiple migrations. The in situ hypothesis argued that a single founding population diversified in place, producing high among-group cranial variation. Yet, the Lagoa Santa evidence undermines this. The within-group variation of Paleo-Americans is not unusually high. Their distinctiveness lies not in heterogeneity, but in their overall morphology, which resembles non-American populations more than later Americans. The multiple migration hypothesis, by contrast, is strengthened. The Lagoa Santa skulls point to an ancestry outside the Americas, likely from an early wave of Northeast Asians before the full development of classic East Asian morphology. Later, another stream of settlers, closer to present-day East Asians, spread into the Americas, ultimately replacing or absorbing the earlier groups. This fits both craniometric and genetic evidence. Genomic studies have revealed signals of Australasian ancestry in some Amazonian populations, suggesting deep and layered origins. A key element of the craniometric analysis was the comparison between the Lagoa Santa Paleo-Americans and their nearest geographic neighbours in Patagonia, the Chubut population. The Chubut people, also known as the Tehuelche, take their name from the Chubut region of Patagonia in southern Argentina. This is a broad area stretching from the Andes in the west to the Atlantic Ocean in the east. In anthropological studies, like the Science Advances paper Chubut, refers to skeletal collections from Patagonian hunter-gatherers who lived there in the late Holocene. The researchers used more robust Patagonian Chubut as the null model, testing whether the older but more gracile Lagoa Santa skulls shared a most recent common ancestor with these later South Americans. If South America had been settled by a single lineage, this close relationship should have explained the cranial patterns, the researchers argued. Yet the model was rejected in every case. Lagoa Santa skulls did not cluster with Chubut, nor with other later South American groups. Instead, the best-fit models linked Lagoa Santa crania to populations outside the continent, including Inuit, Australians, and even broader East Asian-derived lineages. This rejection of the Chubut hypothesis underscored the point. The Paleo-Americans of Lagoa Santa represented a distinct wave of settlers, not the direct ancestors of later South Americans. The morphology is reinforced by cultural differences. At Lapa do Santo, 3 distinct burial phases were observed. The earliest, between 10,600 and 9,700 years ago, featured intact burials, such as a child placed in a seated position. The second, between 9,600 and 9,400 years ago, showed deliberate removal and rearrangement of body parts, sometimes with bones painted or burned. One famous case involved a man whose skull and severed hands were arranged together. The third, between 8,600 and 8,200 years ago, reduced bodies to disarticulated bundles deposited in small pits. These shifting rituals suggest not continuity, but transformation. Populations inhabiting Lagoa Santa over several millennia practiced radically different funerary customs. While such cultural shifts could reflect internal evolution, they may also indicate turnover in population, different peoples arriving, perhaps from distinct migratory waves, and bringing with them new ways of treating the dead. Although direct ancient DNA from Lagoa Santa remains is scarce, broader genomic research supports the idea of layered migrations. Studies have suggested that all Native Americans descend from a Northeast Asian population that crossed Beringia at least 15,000 years ago. Yet additional signals complicate this simple story. The discovery of Population Y, an ancient lineage in Amazonian groups with affinities to Australasians, has puzzled geneticists. Craniometric data from Lagoa Santa match this enigma. The skull's affinities to Australasia echo the genetic traces in the Amazon. This suggests that an early migration into South America may have been related to a substructured Northeast Asian population with links to Australasia. Later, other waves bearing more East Asian morphology swept into the Americas and became dominant. Thus, skulls and genomes together tell a story of multiple dispersals with differing levels of Denisovan and Neanderthal ancestry, each leaving faint but enduring marks. One striking observation is that Paleo-American morphology may not have disappeared entirely. Skulls of the Botocudo, a group in Brazil exterminated during the colonial period, retain elements of the Lagoa Santa form. Archaeologists have argued that Paleo-American morphology survived in pockets until very recently. This continuity underscores that multiple lineages coexisted in South America for thousands of years, some persisting on the margins until modern times. The inhabitants of Lagoa Santa were not farmers, but hunter-gatherers subsisting on fish, rodents, lizards, and fruits. Isotopic studies suggest a surprisingly plant-heavy diet, rich in carbohydrates, reflected in high rates of dental cavities. Their tools were simple, with only a few bone fishhooks recovered. These were small groups living at the edge of subsistence. Such marginal existence may have made them vulnerable to replacement when later waves of settlers entered South America with different technologies or social structures. The Lagoa Santa evidence alters how we view the peopling of the Americas. Instead of a single migration spreading southward, the continent was a mosaic of arrivals. Paleo-Americans represent an early, generalized lineage that may share ancestry with Australasian populations. Later settlers from Northeast Asia carried a different morphology and became the dominant ancestors of most present-day Native Americans. This layered history explains both the morphological distinctiveness of Lagoa Santa and the genetic complexities observed in Amazonian groups. The bones of Lagoa Santa whisper a story of multiplicity. Their faces do not match the faces of later indigenous peoples. Their burial practices shift from intact interments to ritual dismemberment. Their lives were lived in precarious balance with a difficult landscape. They represent one of several beginnings of South America. Later settlers, different in appearance, culture, and ancestry, possibly with tattoos, jewelry, or other cultural practices, joined or replaced them. The dissimilar skull morphologies are not anomalies. They are the fossilized record of multiple migrations, each leaving a human legacy in the continent's deep past. South America was not settled once, but many times, by peoples whose diverse origins still shape the genetic and cultural tapestry of its descendants. The caves of Lagoa Santa, with their haunting burials and enigmatic skulls, remain the clearest window into this layered history. In their silence lies the proof that America was never peopled by one voice alone, but by a chorus of migrations, each adding new notes to the continent's human symphony. Thank you for watching.